While American bombs were falling on Tehran and Iranian missiles were hitting U.S. bases across the Gulf, something happened in a server room that nobody put on the front page. $55 billion moved across borders in seconds. No SWIFT code, no correspondent bank, no U.S. Treasury oversight, no sanctions enforcement mechanism of any kind. Just digital yuan flowing through a Chinese-built financial rail directly between the central banks of China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand. At half the cost and 1,000 times the speed of the system America built its global power on. That number, $55 billion, is not a pilot program anymore. It is not a test. It is not theoretical. It is operational infrastructure, processing real government transactions in real time while the Middle East burns. And the timing is not a coincidence. Stay with me, because what just crossed the $55 billion threshold is the most important economic weapon ever aimed at American financial dominance, and it was built in plain sight while Washington was looking at missiles. Let's start with what SWIFT actually is, because most people know the name but not the mechanism. SWIFT is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It is the messaging system that connects over 11,000 financial institutions in more than 200 countries. Every time a bank in Germany sends money to a bank in Japan, the instruction travels through SWIFT. Every time an oil exporter in Riyadh receives payment from a refinery in Seoul, SWIFT carries the message. SWIFT itself doesn't move money. It moves the authenticated orders that tell banks to move money. And because almost every major international bank relies on SWIFT to function, whoever controls access to SWIFT controls access to the global economy. The United States learned this in 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Washington didn't send tanks on day one. It cut 7 Russian banks from SWIFT. Within 72 hours, the ruble collapsed. $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves were frozen in Western institutions. Financial decapitation executed in a single weekend. That demonstration of power sent a message to every government on earth that wasn't allied with Washington. The message was brutal and immediate. You exist inside the financial system America controls. Cross the wrong line and you disappear from it. But it also sent a second message, one that Beijing received and acted on instantly. If SWIFT is a weapon, you need a weapon that SWIFT cannot reach. Project mBridge was already under construction. After 2022, China stopped treating it as an experiment and started treating it as a strategic imperative. Here is what mBridge actually is, and why the $55 billion number should shock every person who understands what it represents. mBridge is a multi-central bank digital currency platform built on distributed ledger technology. It enables real-time cross-border payments and currency exchange between participating central banks and their authorized commercial institutions. Transactions settle in seconds, not the 2 to 5 business days that SWIFT-dependent correspondent banking requires. Transaction costs run at approximately half the SWIFT equivalent. And critically, the entire system operates on rails that the United States Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and every Western sanctions enforcement body has zero visibility into and zero control over. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, based in Basel, Switzerland, helped build mBridge from 2021 through 2024. Then in October 2024, 1 week after the BRICS summit in Kazan, where Putin proposed a BRICS-wide alternative payment system, the BIS quietly walked out of the project. The official reason was that BIS systems cannot be used by sanctioned countries. The real reason was that mBridge had evolved from a payment efficiency experiment into a geopolitical instrument that Western institutions could no longer credibly claim to govern. Beijing took over completely, and the numbers since then tell the story of what happens when China runs something without Western oversight. From its early pilot phase in 2022 to November 2025, mBridge processed over 4,000 cross-border transactions with a cumulative value of $55.5 billion. That is a 2,500-fold increase in 3 years. China's digital yuan, the ECNY, accounts for 95% of total settlement volume on the platform. The participating central banks are the People's Bank of China, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the Central Bank of the UAE, and the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. Read that list again carefully. Saudi Arabia. The country whose decision to price oil exclusively in US dollars in 1974 created the petrodollar system that has underwritten American financial hegemony for 50 years. Saudi Arabia's central bank is now an active participant in a Chinese-built payment platform that processes energy and commodity transactions in digital yuan, bypassing the dollar-denominated system entirely. That is not a footnote. That is a tectonic shift dressed up as a fintech announcement. And in November 2025, mBridge crossed from commercial use into government use. The UAE Ministry of Finance and the Dubai Department of Finance executed an official government financial transaction on the platform using the wholesale digital dirham. Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the vice president of the UAE, was present alongside the central bank governors of China and the UAE. This was not a bank transferring funds. This was a sovereign government conducting official state financial operations outside the dollar system, with the second in command of one of America's most strategically critical Gulf partners standing in the room. Now layer this on top of what is happening in the Middle East right now, because the timing creates a strategic picture that is massive in its implications. Operation Epic Fury is in its 12th day. The Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed to commercial traffic. 2 more vessels were struck on the morning of March 11th. A container ship hit by unknown munitions, crew evacuated. Oil broke through $100 per barrel and is tracking toward $120. Qatar has suspended LNG exports. Europe is simultaneously losing Russian gas and Gulf gas for the first time in the post-war era. And America's primary tool for economic coercion, the ability to cut adversaries from SWIFT and freeze dollar-denominated assets, is being systematically made irrelevant by a platform that processes $55 billion of transactions that Washington cannot see, cannot freeze, and cannot stop. Here is the mechanism that makes this instantly dangerous for American power. The petrodollar system works like this. Gulf states sell oil. Oil is priced in US dollars. Buyers must acquire US dollars to purchase oil. Global demand for dollars stays permanently elevated. Dollar-denominated US Treasury bonds absorb that demand. America borrows cheaply because the entire world needs dollars to buy energy. That circular system has financed American military dominance, deficit spending, and geopolitical leverage for 5 decades. mBridge attacks this system at its foundation. If Saudi Arabia and the UAE can settle energy transactions in digital yuan through a platform America cannot touch, the dollar's structural advantage begins to erode, not collapse overnight. The Atlantic Council was careful to note that mBridge is unlikely to challenge dollar dominance directly, but the key phrase from their analysis is what follows. It may incrementally erode it across specific corridors, sectors, and use cases. Incremental erosion of a $50 trillion financial architecture does not look like a crash. It looks exactly like what is happening right now. 4,000 transactions, $55 billion, 95% digital yuan, government-level adoption in the UAE, Saudi Arabia's central bank inside the system, and a war in the Middle East that is simultaneously disrupting the dollar-denominated energy trade that makes the petrodollar system function. Every day the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, Gulf oil exporters face a choice: store production they cannot ship, and Iraq has approximately 6 days of remaining storage capacity as of March 11th, or reroute trade through alternative channels. Alternative channels increasingly mean mBridge. Alternative channels increasingly mean digital yuan settlement. Alternative channels increasingly mean transactions that generate zero demand for US dollars. The war that America launched to prevent Iranian nuclear weapons is simultaneously accelerating the financial architecture that China built to make American sanctions weapons obsolete. That is an asymmetric outcome that no Pentagon wargame modeled. And Beijing is not the only actor extracting strategic value from this crisis. On January 1st, 2026, China flipped a switch that barely made Western headlines. The digital yuan began paying interest. That single policy change transformed the ECNY from digital cash, which sits idle, into digital deposit money that competes directly with commercial bank accounts. 2.25 billion digital yuan wallets now exist. China has 1.4 billion people. The math means this is no longer purely domestic adoption. The system is already leaking across borders, and in December 2025, the People's Bank of China updated CIPS rules, China's domestic interbank payment system, to reduce dependence on SWIFT for final settlement. This wasn't a pilot adjustment. This was operational restructuring of the plumbing that connects Chinese banks to global finance. America built SWIFT over decades. China is building its replacement in years. And the war that America is fighting in the Middle East right now is providing the most compelling advertisement for mBridge that Beijing could have designed. Every government watching Operation Epic Fury is asking the same question. If America can freeze $300 billion of Russian reserves over a weekend, what happens to our reserves if we cross the wrong line? mBridge is the answer China is selling, and the Gulf states that are currently having their infrastructure struck by Iranian missiles, launched from countries that America armed and trained to project power. Those same Gulf states are the participants in mBridge. The UAE government just completed its first official state transaction on the platform. Saudi Arabia's central bank is inside the system. These are not adversaries of America. These are America's closest Gulf partners, quietly building an exit from dollar dependency while publicly maintaining the alliance. That is not betrayal. That is rational risk management by governments that watched Russia get financially decapitated in 72 hours and concluded that no alliance is permanent. Here is what the next phase of this looks like, and why the $55 billion number is about to grow at a rate that will make the 2,500-fold increase since 2022 look slow. mBridge is currently expanding its focus specifically toward energy and commodity-linked transactions. That is not accidental language from the platform's architects. That is the direct targeting of the petrodollar's most critical function. If even 20% of Gulf oil settlement migrates to digital yuan rails over the next 3 years, the structural demand for US dollars and global energy trade drops by trillions annually. The US Treasury market loses a permanent source of demand. American borrowing costs rise. The deficit becomes harder to finance. Military spending faces pressure. The feedback loop that connects dollar dominance to military dominance begins to tighten. And all of this is happening while America is spending its political capital, military credibility, and international relationships on a war in Iran, whose economic consequences are accelerating the very financial shift it was supposed to prevent. The GPS systems that guide American precision munitions over Tehran run on satellite infrastructure that depends on financial systems that mBridge is designed to make optional for the countries America needs to maintain pressure. The sanctions that were supposed to keep Iran contained have spent 20 years teaching every country on Earth to build financial alternatives. And China spent those 20 years building the most sophisticated of those alternatives. $55 billion moved without SWIFT, 95% of it in digital yuan. Saudi Arabia's central bank processed it. The UAE government authorized it at the vice presidential level. The Bank for International Settlements walked out of the project 18 months ago because it could no longer pretend the system wasn't geopolitical. And the war currently burning through the Middle East is providing the most powerful live demonstration in history of exactly why every government on Earth needs a financial system that Washington cannot weaponize against them. The dollar is not dying today. The dollar is not dying this year. But the infrastructure that would allow the world to live without it has just crossed $55 billion in cumulative transactions, growing 2,500-fold in 3 years. And it is specifically targeting the energy corridors that create structural dollar demand. That is not the end of dollar dominance. That is the beginning of its measurable erosion. And once infrastructure is built, it does not get unbuilt. SWIFT took decades to become indispensable. mBridge is taking years to become an alternative. The question is not whether China's kill switch for the dollar works. The question is how many transactions it takes before the erosion becomes irreversible. 55 billion was the milestone nobody covered. The next milestone will be harder to ignore. Tell me in the comments, does mBridge change how you think about holding dollars, investing in US assets, or trusting that the financial system America built stays intact through this war? And share this video right now, because the financial story underneath the military story is the one that will affect your life for the next 20 years. The bombs get the headlines. The platform processing $55 billion in digital yuan gets the future.